Wilding. Welcome to another show of Anna Wilding in Conversation. And today my guest is Larisa Miller. I'm going to tell you all about Larisa in a minute. It's quite incredible. For those who don't know me, I am an award-winning filmmaker. I founded a charity a while ago. I have a touring exhibition that was cancelled because of COVID. Yes, we've all been affected. And I came out with this beautiful book on the Obamas and many, many other things. My guest today is very special, and I'm so thankful that we've managed to connect in her busy schedule. Her name is Larisa Miller. She has worked for the royal family of Dubai. She has worked for the former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge. She has been named one of the top most influential people in business in the United States, of course, one of the top most influential women as well. And the accolades just keep piling up on this woman, Larisa Miller, who has worked all over the world. And Larisa, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure, Anna. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about some of the differences that you've encountered working in the Northern Africa and the African region and the Middle Eastern region.
No, it was wonderful. It was an honor to work in the UAE. The UAE is one of the most progressive and forward-thinking countries in the world, always looking to be about 20 years ahead of everyone else with their innovation strategies, and they prioritize sustainability. They have amazing opportunities for women and their views on equality for women. Women in business, a good percentage, I would say probably about 35% of the cabinet is made up of women in the UAE. The majority of college graduates are women in the UAE, and mostly in STEM. And really there was phenomenal opportunity. I was never treated any different in the UAE than I would be anywhere else. I never had to behave in any unusual way. And I really have a great admiration for the UAE and their commitment. I mean, you have a country that is 10 times smaller than the state of Texas, and their impact on the world, both as far as humanitarian projects, as well as innovative research and development in technology moving forward, their commitment to global food security, their commitment to renewable energy. It really places them in the lead position amongst countries that are much bigger than the UAE.
And so, just talking about women in that region as opposed to sort of directly Saudi Arabia, we're talking about Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Is there a market? This obviously sounds like there's quite a difference between how women are regarded and treated in those different regions.
Well, I can't speak for Saudi so much. I mean, an American woman, I haven't gone to Saudi,
Right.
but the atmosphere in Saudi, while it's becoming more progressive, is still much more traditional. Right. And in the UAE, that's not the case so much. Women are regarded as a very important part of the building of a strong global economy. And they recognize that the perspective of women is decidedly different than what men have. So men are typically, and these are gross generalizations, but they generally apply to the genders. Men are very linear in their thinking and very methodical, and they follow one track at a time, whereas a woman's brain is a giant ball of string or wire, and it's electrified, and we tend to go in many different directions at one time. And we are much more emotional beings as well. And when you combine the thought processes of men and the thought processes of women, you can really come out with some extraordinary innovations and solutions. And the UAE recognizes that and places great value on that.
Right, which is utterly amazing. Now, you're also ambassador for the State of the African Diaspora, which is basically a individual state that is set up comprising and to represent all of the African countries in the continent. I was reading more about the history of Nigeria, and there at one point they actually had a kingdom that was run by queens. It was all run by queens. So we're talking about a culture, and at least in terms of Nigeria, that has had very strong kingdoms of women, but still there seems to be, in many instances in Africa, in some countries, I still get the feeling, or when I have liaised and done work there, that women are not quite as advanced in the eyes of men yet. What would you say?
No, and I agree. And I think there's various reasons for that. One is tribal cultural, where many of the tribes still subscribe to the mandates of past, where men are the hunter-gatherers, breadwinners, and women are the ones that bear children and keep the household. And you have a continent that is what I love to say is the landmass that will save the world, as we have urban sprawled ourselves out of our global food security, and Africa has all of the resources that mankind needs to survive, to include the human assets. But they've never had the financial resources to be able to grow at the accelerated rate that the more complex nations of the world have done. And so with that in mind, they've not had the exposure to a society that really makes education and employment and regards the views of women equally in the building of, you know, your executive branch and your legislative branch. And I think that's now fundamentally starting to change as Africa sees that they do have the elements that can make them a global player. They just have to build themselves and do it rapidly. So whereas the United States has gone through centuries and within those centuries, decades of growth that have led us from where we were at the founding to where we are today, Africa is going to have to do that in a much more condensed time. So when Africa looks at developing transportation, for instance, and let's take railway for an example, they're not going to be able to start with the trains that we had back in the turn of the century, the 18th to 19th, the 19th to the 20th century. They're going to have to immediately start with the Hyperloop.
High speed or the Hyperloop.
So everything is going to have to be much more accelerated. And along with that, as we build those opportunities and we start training the human assets for that, they're going to fundamentally have to recognize the value of women and the important role that women will play in the development of the continent. So while 20 years ago it was still a very traditional continent and roles were still very transcribed, you have now a continent that is recognizing that they have to accelerate rapidly and that women will play an important role. And I think in the next 10 years, you will see that women will begin stepping out of those traditional roles and into more professional roles, more authoritative roles. And as the continent grows and as the finances in Africa grow, I think you're really going to see a shift in the mindset of the importance of women.
I've been really impressed with some of the young people I've been dealing with there in their 20s who are coming through now, very eager to get their land onto a progressive, positive map full of diversity and equality. Obviously, huge growth in STEM. They have a country to build, rebuild, build on. Do you think it's going to, let's take the Hyperloop, let's take a high-speed rail, which we're used to seeing in Spain and other countries in Europe, but let's face it, America hasn't even got round to it yet, except for New York to DC. We have one that's a short 5-hour sprint. Africa seems poised that it has an incredible opportunity here if it does get everything together and get all the education and training and the engineers and everything. How long before we see a Hyperloop or something in Africa, do you think?
You know, it's coming, and it's in the plans imminently. Several nations are looking at it, and they're recognizing that the city, the country, and the capital city that adopts these advanced technologies will essentially set themselves up well to be the nucleus of technology, the nucleus of commerce, the nucleus of education. And in whichever city, and there are several who are considering this, but whichever city in Africa is essentially the first out of the gate with this, will set themselves up to be the Dubai of Africa and so forth.
Yeah.
And that creates great economic value for that country. So in many ways it is a race, but all of the stars have to align within those nations, where they have to recognize that, you know, now we have to respect and play nicely with our neighbors, because we're all going to depend on one another for fair and equitable trade and commerce. They're beginning to recognize that platforms of anti-corruption are going to be mandatory in the African nations that will step ahead as the vanguards of the future on the continent. And it's a shift, because while you have the older generations that still very much do business in Africa the way it's been done for generations, you have the new people who are exposed to the accelerant that has really propelled the complex nations of the world into their positioning. And they can see that in order to do that, you have to bring in education, you have to have industry, you have to have commerce, you have to have strong ports. When you look at the continent and recognize that technology is going to be the nucleus of the future, it's going to be the nations that set themselves up well for the future of technology. Data centers. Well, data centers are also huge consumers of energy. So that means you're going to have a way to be able to generate power on a continent that is still suffering with large-scale energy poverty.
And famine and water issues, the whole...
It's everything. And that's why when Africa fundamentally puts together a plan for development, it's going to have to be rapid, it's going to have to be able to accelerate and scale, and it's going to have to be done right now.
And in terms of accelerating and scale, let's look at the other issues that are in Africa, which is famine and electricity shortages and great poverty still in some areas. How can those areas be accelerated? Do you think the Africans will pay attention to that and actually bring people with them, rather than what happened in India, where people have been left behind en masse?
Yes. I think that, no, I don't think. I know that Africa sees that, you know, in order to be able to develop, first of all, they have to make all of their citizens stakeholders of the country. And in order to do that, it's going to take funding allocations, because you can't have a nation that is going to develop and be competitive with nations like the United States and China and Germany if you have an uneducated pool of human assets. You know, you will wind up being hostage to the countries with big investment money who want to come in and take over your projects. And oh, by the way, they bring their own labor at the same time. So it all starts with
bank and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it all starts with education. And Africa cannot do a traditional educational model like we have in the United States. Brick and mortar schools aren't feasible in Africa, because you have children that have to walk 2 hours to be able to get to a physical school. And you know that's not going to happen 5 days a week. And you have the fact that education, a traditional education, isn't going to give value to a lot of Africans, because they have to be able to step into some sort of a trained vocation. So that means that we're going to have to look at opportunities for apprenticeship, where you can train an electrician and you can train someone to take care of the solar panels in a town, and you can train someone to be a plumber and have them step into a position where they can be a master carpenter. And use mentorship and apprenticeship as your way to get there, rather than trying to take Africa down a traditional role that the Western nations have followed.
Right, which is not always working. So let's talk about America. We are in another major civil rights moment.
It's much needed too.
I was just going to say it's much needed. You took the words right out of my mouth. And we're in a situation where Africa, who usually looks to us for help and support, is saying, we want to help and support you, because we see what's happening to our diaspora. We see what's happening to our Africans in America now. And so America has this huge coming to Jesus moment, and I use that, probably it's a bit of a pun with the current administration. We're in the middle of a crisis. And one thing I notice when I deal with Africa is how heart-centric they still are, how humanitarian driven they still are in their hearts. Even if there's major problems in Africa, their hearts and soul and spirit seem to come first and foremost in most of what they do, which seems like an incredible teaching moment in a way for America that has become so consumed by capitalism, and it's not working. So when we look at opening and building even stronger bridges between Africa and here, what do you think are some of the takeaways that American companies can take and apply in America right now?
Well, there's a lot of parallels between Africa and America, and a lot, like you said, a lot of lessons to be learned from the continent of Africa. And I can tell you that as a white, green-eyed, it doesn't get much more Caucasian looking than I am woman, who does business across the continent of Africa and does serve as an ambassador to the diaspora, I have never not been welcomed. You know, Africa they're very proud of their countries, they're very proud of their cultures and their tribes, and they're eager, if you are interested and open and welcoming and receptive to the fact that they, you know, have these cultural traditions and differences, and you want to experience their food, they're so welcoming. What most Black Americans and Blacks around the world, and I say Blacks because not every Black is an African American, right, or an African Australian, but what they don't recognize is that they are members of the African diaspora. So the state of the African diaspora, while it fundamentally looks at all of the nations in Africa and the citizens who have been displaced or have relocated, that also includes, you know, Africans that are in South America and Africans that are in the United States of America and around the world. And, you know, now is the time to really, for all of us, whether we're Black or white, we're seeing because of the COVID epidemic that we fundamentally have to now look at the world as our community, and we have to have a much more inclusive mindset. So a business that was community-centric in Peoria, Illinois, is now recognizing that because we don't have a physical business place that we can rely on, that we need to turn to technology and look at that to essentially make the world our community. And Africa recognizes this. And Africa recognizes that you know, there are many opportunities to relate to the United States and to begin looking at the United States to do business with. And thusly, we can encourage African business owners, Black business owners in the United States to be able to look at Africa as an extension of the United States. You know, they have a great need for commerce. They have a great need for e-commerce. Almost any business that we have here in the United States, there's a need for in Africa. And through the wonders of technology, we can easily expand our business practices without having to expand our physical presence outside of the continent.
And I think we're going to, and it's going to be about ethics. Every company is going to have its ethics governance, and they're just going to have to listen to the people, right?
That's it. Absolutely.
You know? Thank you very much. I greatly appreciated it. Hope to see you again soon. I'm sure I will.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anna.
Africa.
For sure.
Okay. See you soon. Thank you very much, Larisa. Bye-bye.